The sun in Okife didn't rise. It yawned, slowly, lazily, like an elder waking from a midday nap. But by the time its golden limbs stretched across zinc roofs and dusty roads, Otagu had already serviced 6 homes. His route was as predictable as it was essential. First was Baba Cunnell's compound, the old man who always requested 3 jerrycans. The sun in Okife didn't rise. It yawned, slowly, lazily, like an elder waking from a midday nap. But by the time its golden limbs stretched acros, but her eyes told stories. Children ran beside Otagu's cart, barefoot and laughing, calling out, "Water Don come! Otagu Water Don land." He grinned at them, tossing one of them a sachet of pure water he had bought earlier. It was a ritual. They were his unofficial crew, his daily joy. Some of their parents couldn't afford consistent water, so Otagu gave freely when he could. At his core, Otagu wasn't just a hustler. He was a man rooted in community. He knew whose tanks leaked, whose taps dripped, who had newborns, and whose mother just passed away. His job required more than muscles. It required memory, empathy, and patience. At mid-morning, he reached the heart of Okife, Oba Square. There, traders bustled like bees, their voices loud and rhythmic, a market melody of negotiation. Otagu parked his cart under the shade of an almond tree and rested briefly. Beside him, 2 men debated the cost of petrol. A woman cursed a bus conductor, and in the corner, a tall figure in white sneakers and sunglasses was surveying a gate. That gate, it had once belonged to the late Mama Nena, the respected midwife. But she had passed, and no one knew what would become of the property. Until today. The woman stood out, not because of her looks, though she was striking, but because of her stillness. Amidst chaos, she was calm. She turned, their eyes met, and time hiccuped. Otagu looked away first, lifting a jerrycan as though he hadn't noticed her. But he had. He would again. And nothing would remain the same. Chioma did not believe in fate. She believed in strategy, timing, and Google Maps. But as she stood by the old, rusting gate of her grandmother's compound, with no water and a bellyful of frustration, she began to reconsider. The taps in the house were dry. The neighbors offered shrugs. Her cousin, who promised to install a new water pump before her return, had vanished like harmattan dew. All roads led to the Borehole man. She had heard about him in whispers. Some called him a genius. Others said he was arrogant. Many just said, "Ask Otagu, he knows." So she asked. He returned that afternoon. Sweat clung to his shirt like a second skin. His shoulders rolled like wheels, silent, steady, built for labor. When she greeted him, he responded with a nod. "You're the new tenant?" he asked. "Homeowner," she corrected, lifting her chin. He glanced at the gate, then at her. "Big difference." "Well, the taps aren't running. Can you fix that?" He knelt beside her borehole tank, tapping the pipes gently. His fingers moved like they had known PVC since birth. She watched him, arms crossed, unsure whether to be impressed or irritated. "Pump is busted," he muttered. "The last person who touched this did it dirty. You'll need a new float switch and maybe a pressure valve. In English, please." He looked up at her, lips twitching. "Your water is sick. I'm the doctor. You'll need medicine." She laughed before she could stop herself. "A real one." Otagu blinked. That was the beginning. For the next few days, he came and went, fixing pipes, laying cables, muttering technical words as she followed him with questions. He found her curiosity annoying. She found his silence infuriating. But under the heat, something softened. One evening, as the borehole finally gurgled to life and water rushed to the pipes, Chioma clapped and danced barefoot. "Thank you, Dr. Water." "You day craze," he muttered, but he was smiling. Okife hadn't seen a celebration like that since Independence Day. That night, alone in her compound, Chioma filled a glass with water, held it to the moonlight, and whispered, "There's something about that man." In his small room across town, Otagu lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling, thinking, there's something about that woman. And just like that, the gate that separated them was no longer a barrier. It was a doorway. Chioma was not used to asking for help twice. She was the kind of woman who did things once, did them well, and expected never to do them again. But the tap in her kitchen had different plans. "Is this normal?" she asked, standing over a trickle of water that barely filled a teacup. "No," Odigwa said. "You day over you, Sam. Pressure don reduce. You said everything was fixed." "I said I fixed it. I didn't say it would obey you like Holy Ghost fire." The way he said it, calm, unbothered, made her laugh again, against her will. "You laugh too easily," he remarked, crouching to inspect the pipe. "You frown too much." It became routine. Each time something hiccuped, Chioma called, and Odigwa came. Not because he had nothing else to do. His schedule was tighter than Okada breaks, but because her calls made his phone vibrate differently. Her voice carried weight, not in volume, but in intention. One Thursday afternoon, she offered him Zobo. He refused at first. Then she said, "What's wrong?" "Afraid it'll make you fall in love." He took the bottle, his eyes lingering a second too long. "I don't fall. I flow." That evening, they sat in her compound, surrounded by buckets and basins. A storm brewed in the distance, thunder rolling like drums of village festival. But in that moment, all was still. Chioma asked questions. Why water? Of all the hustles in this world. Odigwa leaned back, arms resting on a jerrycan. Because water no day lie. When you dig deep, it shows you what's inside the earth. Same with people. I like to dig deep. She sipped her Zobo slowly, watching him. You talk like a preacher. I listen more than I talk. Maybe that's why people trust you. He shrugged. Trust is like water. Easy to waste. Hard to get back. The storm never came that night. But something else arrived silently, an understanding, a soft peeling of layers. Their conversations became longer. Silences became comfortable. But with closeness came friction. One morning, she asked him not to deliver water through her side gate anymore. It's disrespectful. People will talk, she said. Let them talk, he replied. They say you spend too much time here. That you're what? She didn't answer. The boundary was drawn. Invisible but thick. He stepped back, adjusted his shirt. I get it. Thank you for the Zobo. As he pushed his card out, something in her chest tightened, like a tap turned too hard. The gate closed behind him with a sound that echoed. Boundaries had been set, but love, like water, always finds a crack. Oki-Ife was not a town of secrets. It was a town of echoes. Say one thing on one street, and it would ricochet through alleyways, across rooftops, until it returned to your own ears with seasoning, spice, and scandal. So when people saw Odigwa pushing his cart more often past Chioma's gate, the talk began. Soft at first, like drizzle. She's always calling him. She's not like the others. I heard she's paying him in more than cash. The rain came heavier, words falling harder. One day, as Chioma walked the market, two women selling pepper stopped talking when she approached. One of them adjusted her scarf. The other smiled too wide. Chioma kept walking head high, but her chest burned. Later that week, Mama Risi pulled Odigwa aside. My son, the town is watching. You're spending time with that girl like your tank no day leak. She's my client, he replied. She's a city woman. City women don't fetch water. They fetch trouble. Odigwa said nothing, but something shifted in him. That night, the skies opened. Thunder cracked across Oki-Ife like a divine warning. The rain poured as if trying to wash away whispers. Chioma stood in her compound, watching it flood. The gutters overflowed. Her yard turned to mush. The old drainage pipe had burst. She dialed Odigwa. He didn't answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Her third attempt was met with the sharp beep of a call rejected. Across town, Odigwa stared at his phone, his jaw clenched. Rain battered his roof, leaking through an old corner. But it was nothing compared to the storm inside him. He wanted to go. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to see her. But he didn't. Chioma, soaked and struggling to contain the flooding, bit back tears. Sometimes love isn't loud. Sometimes it hides behind silence. But the rain, oh, the rain tells all. Odigwa did not sleep that night. The storm outside had slowed to a drizzle, but the one inside him raged on. He knew Okife. He knew its gossip. He had lived long enough to know that too much kindness could be mistaken for courting, and too much presence could be twisted into possession. But Chioma didn't deserve this. The next morning, he woke before the first rooster crowed. He washed his face with rainwater caught in a plastic bowl and stared at his reflection. Fix the pipe, he told himself. Nothing more. When he arrived at her gate, she was already outside. Mud splattered her trousers, and her hands were raw from scooping water. But she looked at him with fire. You ignore my calls. Yes. Why? He sighed. Because I didn't want to embarrass you. This town, it twists things. I can handle them, she said. What I can't handle is being treated like I don't matter. He looked at her then, really looked, at the tired eyes, the trembling hands, the woman who had come home not to rest, but to rebuild. I came to fix the pipe, he said quietly. She stepped aside. He entered. They worked in silence. Mud caked their shoes. The burst pipe fought him at first, gushing like a wounded beast. He cursed under his breath. She laughed, then quickly stopped herself. I missed that, he said without looking up. What? Your laugh. The pipe hissed, then quieted. Water flowed steadily. They both stood, soaked but triumphant. Next time, he said, get someone else to fix your pipe. Next time, she replied, maybe don't run when it rains. He paused. I didn't run. I hesitated. And now, he met her gaze. Now I'm standing still. In the background, water trickled like a quiet applause. Something had been fixed, not just a pipe. And as they stood there, in the ruins of a rainy misunderstanding, pride gave way. To something deeper, to something that flowed. Every dry season, Okife held its most ironic celebration, the Festival of Thirst. A week-long ceremony meant to honor the gods of rain and water. It was colorful, loud, full of firecrackers and waterless rituals, complete with mock parades carrying empty basins and drums shaped like calabashes. But this year, something was different. The village boreholes had begun drying up. Even Odigwa's most trusted well, in the west quarter, gurgled like an old man trying to clear his throat. The clay-red ground had cracked in places he had never seen before. Elders said it was a punishment of the gods. The youth said it was climate change. Odigwa said nothing, but he listened. Chioma approached him one morning with a folded leaflet. They want you to speak at the festival. Share your water-saving techniques. He scoffed. They don't listen until they're dying of thirst. They're listening now. She was right. His name had become more than a name. In a town slowly choking on its own dryness, the man who could summon water from the earth was being seen as a prophet. When the festival began, Odigwa stood on the makeshift podium with his hands callous and stained, his face stern under the harsh sun. If water is life, why do we treat it like gossip? He asked, spilling it carelessly, chasing it only when it disappears. He taught them how to check for underground leakage, how to store rainwater using zinc sheets, and how to build simple filtration systems using sand and charcoal. People clapped. Children stared in awe. Elders nodded like they were seeing him for the first time. Chioma watched from the front row, and for the first time, she didn't see a water cellar. She saw a teacher. That night, as the festival lit up with dancing and drumming, Odigwa sat beside her, their shoulders barely touching. You spoke well, she said. I spoke truth, he replied. Sometimes they're the same. She leaned closer. So what do we do when the truth is that we're thirsty for more than just water? He looked at her. The festival faded into the background. Then, he said, we find a well deep enough to hold both our truths. And just like that, in the middle of a drought, something bloomed. Not from the sky. From within. After the festival, Odigwa became a man both respected and resented. respected by those who now saw him as a craftsman of survival, resented by those who preferred the old ways, who murmured that one man should not hold so much sway over the thirst of a town. It began with sabotage. First, one of his borehole pumps was tampered with. A rusted nail jammed into the mechanism. Then his storage tanks were found leaking, cut clean, not eroded. Someone had declared war, quietly, cowardly. Chioma was the first to notice. "These are not accidents," she said, holding a flashlight over the damage. "You're being targeted." "I know. What will you do?" "Dig deeper. That's all I know how to do." The next day, he gathered the youth of Okife, boys with no jobs but strong hands and restless minds. He taught them how to drill, how to map groundwater paths, how to test soil. He called it the People's Water Initiative. The elders watched with suspicion. The council grew tense. "Why train them?" one chief asked. "If everyone knows what you know, what becomes of your value?" Odogwa's reply was quiet but sharp. "Water is not mine to keep. It's mine to give." But not all wounds were visible. That evening, Chioma found him sitting alone, staring at a rusted wrench like it held answers. "What's wrong?" she asked. "My father was a borehole digger," he said. "He died in a collapsed well. People said it was his fault, that he dug too deep. That's what they always say, when someone tries to reach too far." She sat beside him, silent. "I promised myself I'd never be like him," he continued. "But here I am, digging, falling, maybe even loving too deep." Chioma reached for his hand. "He didn't fall. He gave. And you're not falling either. You're healing this town. And me." He turned to her slowly. The well inside him, the one he'd sealed off long ago, began to open. Sometimes wounds don't bleed. They leak, quietly, over time. But love, real love, doesn't just fill, it seals. Chapter 8. The Well That Whispers. There was a well at the edge of Okife no one used, covered in moss, wrapped in superstition. Elders claimed it whispered to those who listened long enough. Some said it was cursed, others that it held the voice of forgotten ancestors. Odogwa had always avoided it, until now. Sabotage continued, rumors deepened. The Council of Elders summoned him for questioning, accusing him of building influence beyond his status. "You're a water seller," Chief Olarumi said, "not a messiah." "I'm just trying to stop people from dying of thirst," he replied. "You're stirring the soil too much," another muttered. "Let sleeping waters lie." That night, unable to sleep, Odogwu wandered toward the old whispering well. Something inside him needed answers about his father, about Chioma, about why helping others had turned him into a threat. He stood before the well, its stones crumbling, vines snaking down into the darkness. He dropped a pebble. It didn't echo. He leaned closer. Silence. Then, faintly, a gurgle. And a voice. "You dig." Not to disturb, but to remember. He stumbled back, heart pounding. The air around the well grew still. He couldn't be sure it wasn't just the wind, or his own grief speaking. But the next morning he returned, with rope, a flashlight, and gloves. Chioma found him there later, mid-descent. "Are you mad?" she shouted. "I need to see what's down here." He emerged an hour later, covered in red clay and shaking. "It's not dry," he said breathlessly. "It's deep and untouched. We've been digging wrong, chasing shallow water. This one's different." He began mapping its structure, its angle, its composition. The town watched from a distance. Fearful, skeptical. But Chioma didn't. She stood beside him. "You heard something, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded. "Not with my ears. With everything else." Sometimes the deepest truths aren't shouted. They're whispered, and only those willing to listen, not just hear, can find them. And in that whispered echo, Odogwu found something else. Conviction and love, rooted deep, still growing. Odogwu stood before the Council of Elders, his heart steady. The well he had found was now a topic of heated debate. The townspeople were restless, divided. Some believed the whispers from the well were the voices of their ancestors guiding them to a better future, while others feared they were an omen of doom. But it wasn't the whispers that kept Otagu up at night. It was the fear in Chioma's eyes. She stood by him, as always, but now there was doubt in her gaze. Why not just leave it? She had asked early that morning, her voice quiet with concern. Why stir things up, Otagu? The council won't be kind. I have to, he had replied, determination thick in his tone. The people need to know what's under their feet. If we keep digging the same shallow holes, we'll never reach the truth. The council's verdict had been swift, too swift. They didn't want a man who threatened the old ways, who stirred the earth in search of deeper truths. You've gone too far, Otagu, Chief Olorunmi said, his voice gravelly. This well, it's not for the likes of you. What does that mean? Otagu demanded. Water doesn't choose who drinks from it. I dig for all of us, not just a chosen few. You dig to feed your own ego, another elder muttered. Your father, he was the same. The words hit harder than any shovel. Otagu stood tall, despite the sting. My father gave his life for this town. He didn't dig for fame. He dug because people were dying of thirst. The council went silent, their eyes dropping in shame. Chioma stepped forward, her voice breaking the silence. What Otagu does, he does for us, for the children who will grow up drinking clean water, for the future. But the council had already made up their minds. They decided that the well would remain sealed, buried under the earth where it belonged. Then I'll dig alone, Otagu said, turning to leave. And so he did. Chioma followed, her steps steady beside him. Where to now? She asked. Home, he said, and then to the well. With a cart in tow, Otagu and Chioma left the council chambers and walked down the dirt road, their hearts resolute, their path uncertain. The town may have turned its back on him, but Otagu wasn't done yet. His work had just begun. The road to the old well was long. Otagu and Chioma pushed the cart, loaded with tools and their hopes, past the abandoned farms, past the gossiping villagers who gave them sideways glances and whispered behind closed doors. They didn't stop, not even when the sun dipped low and the evening chill. The first shovel hit the ground with a sharp crack, and they began. Together, the work was grueling, the sweat pouring down their backs, but they moved as one, hand in hand, driven by something stronger than themselves. By the time the moon rose, the well had been uncovered. The earth had given way, revealing a deep, clear pool of water. The first shovel hit the ground with a sharp crack, and they began. Together, the work was grueling, the sweat pouring down their backs, but they moved as one, hand in hand, driven by something stronger than themselves. By the time the moon rose, the well had been uncovered. The earth had given way, revealing a deep, clear pool of water that shimmered like liquid glass. Otagu stood up, his legs sore, his body aching, but his heart light. He looked at Chioma, her face illuminated by the moonlight. We did it! She nodded, her eyes reflecting the water's glow. We did. But this is just the beginning. And as the water flowed freely, as the earth sang its quiet, ancient song, Otagu knew it wasn't just a town that had been saved. It was him,